You ever look at like a massive tree and think, wow, how did all that wood and leaves and everything come from a tiny seed?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right? I mean, obviously sunlight is key, but
Right, sunshine and water, but
yeah. But where does the actual like material come from to build all that plant tissue, you know?
it's easy to forget that the soil itself is like this incredibly important source of nutrients for plants. Uh,
Absolutely. It's not just something for the roots to hold on to. It's like a whole intricate system that nourishes the plant.
so that's what we're diving deep into today, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be taking a close look at this chapter all about soil and plant nutrition.
And really kind of unpacking this amazing relationship between the two, how plants get the specific elements they need to thrive from the soil.
Exactly. We'll be looking at the key theories, the
Yeah.
concepts, the research findings, even some of the little details you might not usually pay attention to.
And trying to make it all clear and understandable and relatable.
Yeah, without getting too bogged down in the technical jargon.
Right, so if you've ever wondered about like the hidden world beneath our feet that feeds all the plants on our planet, this deep dive is for you.
Exactly. We're going to be your guides through this fascinating chapter.
Okay, so let's get right into it. This chapter really emphasizes that soil isn't just inert dirt, right?
Oh, definitely not. It's a dynamic, living ecosystem teeming with life.
Right, so where should we start? What are the basic things we need to understand about soil before we even talk about how plants use it?
Well, I think a good place to begin is with the physical properties of soil, like its texture and composition.
Okay, so when we talk about soil texture, what are we actually talking about?
So texture basically refers to the size of the particles that make up the soil. You can think of it like sand on a beach. You've got the larger sand grains you can easily see.
Right.
Then you've got finer silt particles, and finally the super tiny microscopic clay particles.
So these are the building blocks of soil.
Yeah, exactly. And the relative proportions of these different sized particles that determines the overall texture of the soil.
And this texture influences things like how well the soil drains, how much water it holds.
Exactly right. And where do all these particles actually come from? Well, they come from the breakdown of rocks over time through a process called weathering.
So the mountains are slowly becoming our gardens.
In a way, yeah, there are two main types of weathering, mechanical and chemical.
So mechanical weathering is like when rocks are physically broken down.
Right, like when water seeps into cracks in a rock, then freezes and expands, it can literally break the rock apart.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. And what about chemical weathering?
That's where rocks are broken down by chemical reactions, like the action of weak acids in the soil, which can dissolve certain minerals.
And these acids can come from various sources, right?
Yeah, rainwater itself can be slightly acidic, and then the decomposition of organic matter in the soil also releases acids.
And even plant roots themselves can release acids.
Exactly. They release acids to help them access nutrients in the soil. So it's a really dynamic process with lots of players involved.
So over time, you get this accumulation of weathered rock particles mixed with organic matter, and that's what forms soil.
Exactly. And as this material builds up, it forms distinct layers called soil horizons.
Oh, yeah. The chapter mentioned those. What are they exactly?
So if you imagine digging a pit straight down into the ground, you'd see these different layers or horizons, each with its own characteristics.
Like a layer cake of dirt.
Yeah, kind of the top layer, which is the most important for plant growth, is called the A horizon or topsoil.
And that's where most of the action happens, right? All the biological activity, the nutrient cycling.
Exactly. Topsoil is this rich mixture of those weathered rock particles, the sand, silt, and clay, along with a whole bunch of living organisms and decaying organic matter, which we call humus.
Humus, that's that dark, crumbly stuff that gardeners love.
Exactly. It's like the lifeblood of the soil and a really fertile topsoil. The kind that supports the most vigorous plant growth is often a loam.
The loam, so that's a specific type of topsoil.
Yeah, it refers to a soil that has a roughly equal mixture of sand, silt, and clay. This balance is key because it gives the soil the best of all worlds.
So it's like the Goldilocks of soil textures, not too sandy, not too clayey.
Yeah, exactly. The sand provides good drainage and aeration so the roots can breathe.
Right, because roots need oxygen too.
Absolutely. They can drown if the soil is waterlogged, and then the silt and clay particles, they're much smaller, so they have a greater surface area.
This surface area is important because
Because it allows them to hold on to water and nutrients more effectively.
so it's this balance between drainage and water retention that's so crucial.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of the soil solution comes in.
The soil solution, so that's not the soil itself, but
It's the water that's held within the spaces between the soil particles. And this water contains dissolved minerals and other nutrients that plants can actually absorb.
so the plants aren't actually eating the dirt, they're drinking the mineral-rich water in the dirt.
That's a great way to put it. And those smaller pores associated with the clay particles, they really help to retain that water through capillary action. And also because water molecules are attracted to the slightly negative electrical charge on the clay surfaces.
Ah, so the water kind of clings to the clay.
Exactly, which is why clay soils can hold so much more water than sandy soils.
Right. But too much water can be a problem too, because then the roots can't get enough oxygen.
Exactly. So that balance is really critical. The best topsoils have a good mix of pore sizes, so there's enough space for both water and air.
Okay, so we've talked about the physical structure of soil. Now let's get into the chemistry a bit. The chapter mentioned inorganic and organic components.
Yes, so the inorganic components are those mineral particles themselves, the sand, silt, and clay.
Right, and the organic components, that's mainly the humus.
Exactly, the humus and all the other living organisms in the soil. And here's a key concept to understand. Most productive soils have particles with a negative electrical charge on their surface.
Negative charge. Okay, why is that important?
It's important because it affects how the soil interacts with different nutrients. Some nutrients exist as negatively charged ions called anions.
Okay, like nitrate, phosphate, sulfate, those are important plant nutrients, right?
Exactly. And because they're also negatively charged, they don't bind well to those negatively charged soil particles, so they tend to be easily leached away by rainwater.
Leached, so they just kind of wash out of the soil.
Exactly, which is why it's important to replenish them through fertilization. And then you have positively charged ions or cations like potassium, calcium, and magnesium.
So the opposite of anions.
Right. And because they're positively charged, they're attracted to and stick to those negatively charged soil particles, so they're less likely to be leached away.
Ah, okay, so the soil can kind of hold on to those nutrients better.
Exactly. Now, here's another important concept called a cation exchange.
Cation exchange. Okay, what's that all about?
So plant roots, they release hydrogen ions, which are positively charged into the soil solution. And these hydrogen ions can actually displace those mineral cations that are stuck to the soil particles, knocking them free into the soil solution where the roots can then absorb them.
So it's like a trading system.
Yeah.
The plant gives up its hydrogen ions in exchange for the mineral cations it needs.
Exactly. And the soil's ability to hold onto and exchange these cations is called its cation exchange capacity.
Cation exchange capacity.
Okay.
That sounds important.
It is. It's a measure of the soil's fertility, basically, and it's influenced by a few factors, like the amount of clay and organic matter in the soil.
So more clay, more humus equals higher cation exchange capacity.
Exactly, because they provide more of those negatively charged binding sites for the saphications to attach to.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's talk more about that organic component, the humus.
Ah, humus. It's the magic ingredient in healthy soil. It's formed by the decomposition of all sorts of organic matter by bacteria and fungi.
So like fallen leaves, dead roots, animal droppings.
Exactly. All that stuff gets broken down and transformed into this rich, dark material that's packed with nutrients.
But humus does more than just provide nutrients, right? It actually improves the soil structure itself.
Absolutely. It helps to prevent clay particles from clumping together too tightly, which creates a more open, crumbly structure.
And why is that good?
Well, this open structure allows for better water infiltration, so water can soak in more easily instead of just running off the surface.
Okay.
And it also improves aeration, so there's more space for air to circulate, which is essential for root health. And as we mentioned earlier, humus increases the cation exchange capacity of the soil.
Right, so it's like a win-win-win situation.
Exactly. It's the foundation of a fertile and productive soil.
It's amazing to think about all the life that's going on in a handful of healthy soil.
Oh, absolutely. It's a bustling metropolis down there. Billions of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, earthworms, all interacting and contributing to the soil ecosystem.
Earthworms, I remember reading they're like little ecosystem engineers.
That's a great way to put it. They burrow through the soil, eating organic matter, and their castings are basically concentrated nutrients.
So they're like little fertilizer factories.
Exactly, and they also help to mix the soil, aerate it, improve drainage. It's amazing how much these little creatures contribute.
And even the roots of plants themselves, they play a role in shaping the soil environment, right?
Oh, definitely. They release acids that can alter the soil pH. They bind soil particles together with their root hairs. They create channels for water and air to flow through. It's a truly dynamic and interconnected system.
Which brings us to this idea of soil conservation and sustainable agriculture. Because it's not enough to just understand how soil works. We need to take care of it.
Absolutely, and it's not a new concept either. Ancient farmers already recognized the importance of soil fertility, and they developed practices like fertilization to replenish the nutrients that were being depleted by their crops.
Right, because if you keep growing the same crops in the same soil year after year, eventually the nutrients get used up.
Exactly, and that's where fertilization comes in to add those essential nutrients back into the system.
But we haven't always been so good at managing our soil resources, have we?
Sadly, no. There have been some pretty devastating examples of soil mismanagement, like the American Dust Bowl in the 1930s.
A real stark reminder of what can happen when we don't take care of the soil.
Absolutely. Decades of unsustainable farming practices combined with a severe drought led to massive wind erosion.
Literally blowing the topsoil away.
Yeah. Huge clouds of dust darkening the sky and rendering millions of acres of farmland unusable. It was a major ecological and human disaster.
And even today, we still face challenges with soil degradation, right?
Oh, definitely. Soil erosion, contamination, nutrient depletion. These are all ongoing problems that threaten food security and environmental health.
So sustainable agriculture is really about finding ways to produce the food we need while protecting and preserving the soil for future generations.
Exactly. It's about using practices that are environmentally responsible, economically viable, and socially just.
And this involves a whole range of strategies, right?
Yeah, things like minimizing tillage, using cover crops, rotating crops to reduce pest and disease pressure.
And being really careful about how we use things like irrigation and fertilizers.
Absolutely, because those can have both positive and negative impacts depending on how they're used.
Let's talk about irrigation for a moment, because it's clearly essential in many parts of the world, but it can also be a major drain on water resources.
That's right. Over-irrigation can deplete aquifers, lead to soil salinization, even cause land subsidence.
Land subsidence, so the ground literally sinks.
Yeah, when too much groundwater is pumped out, it can cause the ground above to compact and settle, and this can damage infrastructure and make farming more difficult.
So it's really important to use irrigation efficiently.
Absolutely. Using techniques like drip irrigation, which delivers water directly to the roots, can significantly reduce water waste.
And then there's the issue of fertilizers,
Yeah.
because as we talked about earlier, essential nutrients are constantly being removed from the soil when we harvest crops.
Exactly. So fertilization is how we replenish those nutrients, and there are basically two main types of fertilizers, synthetic and organic.
So synthetic fertilizers are the ones that are manufactured in factories.
Right. They're typically made from things like petroleum or natural gas, and they provide nutrients in a readily available form.
And organic fertilizers are derived from natural sources, like manure, compost, bone meal.
Exactly. And they tend to release nutrients more slowly as they decompose in the soil.
So is one type inherently better than the other?
While they each have their pros and cons, synthetic fertilizers can provide a quick boost of nutrients, but they're also more prone to leaching and runoff, which can pollute waterways.
And organic fertilizers are more environmentally friendly, but they might not provide nutrients as quickly.
Right. So it really depends on the specific situation, the type of crop, the soil conditions, the management practices.
And another important factor that affects nutrient availability is soil pH.
Absolutely. Soil pH, which is a measure of its acidity or alkalinity, has a huge impact on how well plants can absorb nutrients.
I remember reading that most plants prefer slightly acidic soils.
Yeah, that's generally true, but different plants have different optimal pH ranges.
So if the soil is too acidic or too alkaline, certain nutrients might become unavailable to the plants.
Exactly. For example, iron becomes less available in alkaline soils, and at very low pH levels, aluminum can become toxic to plants.
So adjusting soil pH can be an important part of soil management.
Yes, adding things like lime to raise the pH, or sulfur to lower it.
And it's a delicate balance, right?
It is. You have to be careful not to create other problems while trying to solve one.
Now, we talked about the Dust Bowl earlier, which was a dramatic example of wind erosion, but water can also cause soil erosion, right?
Oh, absolutely. Rainwater flowing over bare soil can carry away topsoil, especially on slopes.
And that topsoil is the most fertile part of the soil, so losing it is a big problem.
It reduces the soil's ability to hold water, and nutrients support plant life.
So how can we prevent soil erosion?
Well, there are a number of strategies: planting cover crops to protect the soil between cash crops.
Cover crops. So those are plants that are specifically grown to cover the soil and prevent erosion.
Exactly, things like clover or rye, they help to hold the soil in place and add organic matter when they decompose.
Okay.
And then there's contour plowing, which means plowing along the contours of the land instead of up and down the slopes.
So the furrows kind of act like little dams slowing down the flow of water.
Exactly. And then there's no-till farming, which is a way of planting crops without disturbing the soil too much.
So you're not plowing or tilling the soil at all.
Right, you're just creating a small slit to insert the seeds. This helps to reduce erosion and also conserve soil moisture.
So it's a more sustainable way of farming.
It is, and it's becoming increasingly popular.
And the chapter mentioned this really interesting concept of phytoremediation.
Oh, yeah, that's using plants to clean up contaminated soils.
So plants can actually remove pollutants from the soil.
Some plants they have the ability to absorb and accumulate certain toxins in their tissues.
Wow. So you basically grow these plants in the contaminated soil, and then you harvest them and dispose of them safely.
Exactly. It's a fascinating and promising approach to soil remediation.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, literally, about the soil itself. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about what the plants are actually extracting from this complex system, the essential elements.
Right, because ultimately all this soil science is about understanding how plants get the nutrients they need to grow.
And it turns out plants are actually pretty picky eaters.
Yeah.
They require a specific set of elements to thrive.
That's right. These are called essential elements because they're absolutely necessary for the plant to complete its life cycle.
And scientists have figured out exactly which elements are essential through experiments, right?
Yes, through a technique called hydroponic culture.
Hydroponics. So that's growing plants in water without soil.
Exactly. By carefully controlling the nutrient solution, you can figure out which elements are absolutely essential.
So you basically give the plant everything it needs except for one element and see what happens.
Exactly. And if the plant can't grow without that element, then it's considered essential.
Okay, that makes sense. And there are two main categories of essential elements,
What?
macronutrients and micronutrients.
Right. The macronutrients are needed in relatively large amounts.
So those are kind of like the main building blocks.
Yeah, things like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium.
And the micronutrients are needed in smaller trace amounts.
Right. Things like iron, manganese, zinc, copper.
So it's like vitamins and minerals for plants.
Yeah, kind of each element plays a specific role in plant growth and metabolism.
The chapter had a handy mnemonic for remembering the macronutrients.
Oh, yeah. C-H-H Kins S Cafe Mg.
That's pretty clever.
It is, and it actually includes iron, which is technically a micronutrient, but it's needed in relatively larger quantities than the other micronutrients.
So it kind of straddles the line between the two categories.
Yeah, it does, but remembering that mnemonic can help you keep track of all the key players.
And each of these essential elements has specific functions within the plant, right?
Absolutely. Nitrogen, for example, is a major component of proteins and chlorophyll.
Chlorophyll, that's the green pigment that allows plants to photosynthesize.
Exactly. So nitrogen is crucial for plant growth and greenness.
And phosphorus is important for energy transfer and DNA synthesis, right?
That's right. It's involved in a lot of key metabolic processes.
And potassium helps to regulate water balance and stomatal opening.
Exactly. And so on. Each nutrient has its own unique role to play.
And when a plant is deficient in one of these essential elements, it can show specific symptoms.
Absolutely. These symptoms can be really helpful in diagnosing nutrient deficiencies.
So like if a plant is lacking nitrogen, its leaves might turn yellow.
Exactly. That's a classic symptom of nitrogen deficiency because nitrogen is needed for chlorophyll production.
And the location of the symptoms can also tell you something, right?
Yes, if the symptoms appear on older leaves first, it usually means the plant is deficient in a mobile nutrient.
Mobile nutrient. So that means the plant can easily move that nutrient from older leaves to younger leaves.
Exactly. So when there's a shortage, it prioritizes the new growth.
And if the symptoms appear on younger leaves first, it means the nutrient is immobile.
Right. The plant can't easily translocate it, so the new growth suffers first.
That's really interesting. So by observing the plant carefully, you can get clues about what might be going on in the soil.
Absolutely. And then you can confirm your suspicions through soil testing or plant tissue analysis.
And this understanding of plant nutrition has implications beyond just growing healthy crops, right?
Definitely, it has important implications for human health, too.
Because we ultimately get our nutrients from plants.
Exactly. And if the soil is deficient in certain nutrients, then the plants grown in that soil will also be deficient.
And this can lead to nutrient deficiencies in humans.
Yes, especially in parts of the world where people rely heavily on a single staple crop.
So ensuring that soils are healthy and fertile is essential for both plant and human health.
Absolutely, it's all connected.
And the chapter also touched on this really interesting and concerning issue of how climate change might be impacting the nutritional quality of our food crops.
Yes, There's growing evidence that rising carbon dioxide levels and temperatures might be causing plants to produce more biomass, but with lower concentrations of certain nutrients.
So like bigger plants, but less nutritious.
Exactly.
Got
And
it.
this could have serious consequences for human health, potentially leading to widespread nutrient deficiencies.
Especially for people who already rely on a limited diet.
Right, so this is an area of active research and concern.
So far, we've mainly talked about plants as if they're just passively absorbing nutrients from the soil,
Right.
but it's actually much more dynamic than that. They have these really fascinating relationships with other organisms in the soil, particularly bacteria and fungi.
Absolutely. It's not just a one-way street, it's a whole network of interactions and exchanges.
So it's more like a symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. Both partners benefit from the association.
And these relationships are especially important for nutrient acquisition.
Definitely. Let's start by talking about bacteria, particularly their role in the nitrogen cycle, because nitrogen is often the most limiting nutrient for plant growth.
Okay, so remind us again, why is nitrogen so important?
Well, nitrogen is a key component of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins.
Proteins. Those are essential for all sorts of things in living organisms.
Right, enzymes, hormones, structural components. Nitrogen is also a major component of chlorophyll.
So without enough nitrogen, plants can't make enough chlorophyll, and they can't photosynthesize efficiently.
Exactly, and the atmosphere is full of nitrogen, but plants can't directly use it in that form.
Right, because that atmospheric nitrogen is in the form of nitrogen gas N2, which has a very strong triple bond between the two nitrogen atoms.
Exactly, and it takes a lot of energy to break that bond, so plants need help from bacteria.
And that's where nitrogen fixation comes in.
Exactly. Nitrogen fixation is the process of converting atmospheric nitrogen gas into a form that plants can use, which is ammonia NH3.
And this process is carried out by certain types of bacteria.
Yes, and it's a really remarkable process because it requires a special enzyme called nitrogenase, which is very sensitive to oxygen.
So these nitrogen-fixing bacteria have to create an anaerobic environment to protect that enzyme.
Exactly. And some of them do this by living in the soil in close association with plant roots.
And one of the most well-known examples of this is the relationship between legumes and rhizobium bacteria.
Right. Legumes are plants like beans, peas, clover, alfalfa.
And these plants have speckle structures on their roots called nodules.
Exactly. And these nodules are where the rhizobium bacteria live and fix nitrogen.
So the bacteria are kind of like little nitrogen factories inside the plant roots.
That's a great way to put it. The bacteria get sugars and other nutrients from the plant.
And in return, they provide the plant with a steady supply of nitrogen.
Exactly. It's a really beautiful example of symbiosis.
And this relationship has been exploited by farmers for centuries, right through crop rotation.
Absolutely. By alternating legumes with non-legumes, you can naturally enrich the soil with nitrogen.
So you're basically using the legumes as a green manure.
Exactly. And it's a much more sustainable way of providing nitrogen than using synthetic fertilizers.
And it's not just legumes that have these nitrogen-fixing partnerships.
No, there are other plants that form similar relationships with different types of bacteria, for example, alder trees.
So it's a widespread phenomenon in the plant kingdom.
It is, and it highlights the importance of these microbial partnerships for plant nutrition.
Okay, so we've covered bacteria now. Let's talk about the other major group of soil microbes that plants interact with fungi.
Fungi are essential for soil health and plant nutrition in many ways, but one of the most important is through mycorrhizae.
Mycorrhizae. So that's a fancy word for?
It literally means fungus root. It's a symbiotic association between plant roots and fungi.
So it's another example of mutualism.
Exactly. The fungus gets sugars from the plant, and in return, it helps the plant to absorb water and nutrients more efficiently.
So it's like an extension of the plant's root system.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. The fungal hyphae, they're these thread-like structures that can extend far out into the soil.
And they're much thinner than plant roots, so they can access nutrients in tiny pores that the roots can't reach.
Exactly, and they can also break down organic matter and release nutrients that the plant can then absorb.
So they're like little nutrient miners for the plant.
Yeah, and they can also protect the plant roots from pathogens and improve soil structure.
It sounds like a pretty amazing partnership.
It is, and it's incredibly widespread. Over 80% of plant species form mycorrhizal associations.
Wow, so it's clearly a very successful evolutionary strategy.
It is, and it's been crucial for the evolution of land plants because early land plants had to cope with nutrient-poor soils.
So these fungal partnerships help them to survive and thrive.
Exactly, and there are two main types of mycorrhiza, ectomycorrhizae and arbuscular mycorrhizae.
And they differ in how they interact with the plant roots.
Right. Ectomycorrhizae, they form a sheath around the outside of the root, and their hyphae grow between the root cells.
Okay.
And arbuscular mycorrhizae, their hyphae actually penetrate into the root cells.
So they're even more intimate with the plant.
They are, and each type of mycorrhiza is associated with different groups of plants.
So ectomycorrhizae are more common in trees, and arbuscular mycorrhizae are more common in herbaceous plants.
Exactly. And these mycorrhizal fungi are essential for the health and productivity of many ecosystems, including forests and grasslands.
So it's not just about individual plants, it's about the whole web of life in the soil.
Absolutely. It's a really fascinating and complex world down there.
And it's something that we're only beginning to understand.
That's right. There's still a lot we don't know, but the more we learn, the more we appreciate the importance of these soil-plant microbe interactions.
And the importance of taking care of this precious resource.
Exactly, because healthy soil is the foundation of a healthy planet.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of soil and plant nutrition.
Yeah, it's amazing how much is going on beneath our feet.
We've learned about the different components of soil, the physical and chemical properties that affect plant growth, the essential elements that plants need.
And those incredible symbiotic relationships between plants and soil microbes.
And it's clear that taking care of our soil is crucial for sustainable agriculture and for the health of our planet.
Absolutely. We need to protect this valuable resource for future generations.
So the next time you see a plant growing, think about all the amazing things that are happening below the surface.
Yeah, it's a whole hidden world that's essential for life as we know it.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left wondering about the long-term impacts of things like intensive agriculture and climate change on these delicate soil ecosystems.
Yeah, that's a really important question and something that scientists are actively studying.
Because if we disrupt these intricate balances, it could have cascading effects on plant health, food security, and the environment.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're all interconnected and we need to find ways to live in harmony with nature.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of soil and plant nutrition.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've learned something new and that you'll join us again next time.
Until then, keep exploring the world around you.
And remember, even the smallest seed holds the potential for incredible growth.
As long as it has healthy soil to nourish it.